I looked through some of the latest final tables and I found this one that I thought is actually a very interesting one because it's from the 5KW Coupe and we have some of the best players in the game and we have both Lena and C. Darwin, who I think play a pretty interesting type of style at the final table with cards up, so I thought we'd take a look at that. What do you think?
Nice.
Without further ado, I would say let's jump into playing, or at least watching people play. I think there's always one thing to start with. What do you think about the players, Mario? Like, when you see this table, let's say you would be in one of their shoes, like, what do you think about these players? How do you approach a table like this?
I was just looking around. I know everyone besides Drew Dares. I would start with C. Darwin, absolute legend. I really like how he approaches final tables. He's playing very loose as chip leader, quite aggressive, and then pushes the edges very wide, but still is not afraid to make big adjustments in the more passive side as well, if necessary. Millennial, absolute legend. Georgie is a friend of mine. Really, really hard worker. I also love how he approaches the game. There are different variations of how everyone approaches it. There are a few things that mostly stand out, but overall, I mean, this is a fan table. I mean, as tough as it gets.
Yeah, I also find it interesting, like, if, let's say, you look at those players, I mean, yes, of course they're good, but, like, do you have particular things where you're like, oh, you know, this is something you would do against this player, or this is something that you think, you know, where you have an exploit, or is it just like, oh, this is, you know, these are all great players?
If I would be on the final table, I think it's a 2-day event. How I would approach it is I would watch the recent replays of them. There are always differences in like how they approach it. So if I notice someone is more ICM aware in certain spots, someone is going rather out of line in certain constellation, I would note that down and I would try to adjust my gameplay based on that. It's not that I will face them in the daily grind often enough for me to have like really good idea of like how everyone plays final tables. So I think the cards of replays are a fantastic way to find strategies against them.
I think generally what I find really cool and what I think is one of the most underused tool in these settings is you can look at some of the best players and see how they play a final table. I mean, that's the best study tool ever. It's like, you know, they will play their best. There's no reason for them to, you know, hide how they play. And you can see exactly like what they fold in the back blind. In a like constellation like this, you know, you will see lots of things like what they open, what they 3-bet with. Like there's a lot of wild hands here where a lot of bluff 3-betting, like what combos they choose, like which stack size they go more aggressive after and so on. Like it's not only interesting to learn about an individual, but I think it's also interesting to just see it as an inspiration, like to look for spots, because I think it gives like a good insight into how they think about tournament poker. So I love watching these type of final tables, and that's why I think it's one of the most valuable sessions to do, to click through a final table like this and look for anomalies, like look for something where like, oh, how's this guy, why is this guy doing something different? So I would just say that's the stuff we gotta be looking for. So, I mean, very, very important spot here for Lena to get it in here. Very well played. I mean, I'm generally just laughing because there's a potential spoiler somewhere. But yeah, he was very short, let's say like this. All right, so let's see. I think this is all pretty standard. And let's look for some of the first interesting hands, actually. This is interesting already, right? Like,
what do you think is Drew's opening range? King 10 suited? King 9 probably is a little bit too wide for 12 blinds.
I don't think I have a suited king open here. I think I just have jams. I mean, I definitely jam King Jack suited, and I mean, yeah, maybe King 10 you could raise fold, but I generally tend to believe that in a constellation like this, where you also have quite some button, small blind, big blind clashes, I just feel like, I do believe at this point that you don't really gain that much by trying to VP-IP much here, so I play the spot pretty tight.
You played pretty tight with mostly jamming, or pretty tight with mostly very tight?
Like pretty tight raising and folding, let's say like this. So I do have some of the jams, obviously, and I do have raise calls, and if I raise fold, then it's probably more like a, yeah, King Jack off King 10 suited probably are reasonable hands to do that with, but like I wouldn't necessarily want to widen it by like King 9 suited, or like, I didn't even think Ace X makes a ton of sense here. So even King Queen off, I think, is probably somewhere between raise fold and jam. I think both probably reasonable option. What do you think about king queen off here or king 10 suited? Do you think those are jam candidates or raise fold?
I would not jam king. I think it's a little bit too wide. Also with that, everybody on this right side, like there's a lot of 12 to 18 big blind. I think there's some jamming with certain combos. I think king jack suited, king queen suited, but I think it goes around min raising and just like having probably ace queen suited plus and tens plus min raise call, and then build some shoving with like ace king off.
Yeah,
queen off.
I think all the offsuit aces will just go on the shoving range. I don't think you have an induce with the offsuit aces. I wouldn't think. I don't think you induce like ace king or ace queen. So
yeah,
quite some shoving.
I was referring to suited. Yeah.
Like even king queen suited, king jack suited, you shove. Like ace 10 suited, ace jack suited, you probably also don't want to raise calls, or you probably also just shove that, although it's not super amazing. All right, I think the king 4, I think this is generally a spot that is quite interesting. I do like the raise fold approach here. Against Padilla, I mean, I have him on the more aggressive side, so I think the value of stuff like that reduces quite a bit against him. So not too sure actually what an entirely optimal range would look like here. I would assume that it's a bit more jamming than we would intuitively do. Like I would definitely intuitively raise fold a bit more than theory, I would think, rather than jamming. Like I could see that king 4 off as a jam in a constellation like this. What do you think?
I believe it's a little bit too wide. I would go more into the suited part with the jamming. It's really difficult to not be overdoing it with the bluffs if you use too many offset combos. I'm not quite sure if king 4 is a little bit too wide, but offset king is a great candidate to raise from the small blind here, and sizing is good. And I think in theory it probably goes to, I'm not sure if pairs rejam it often from Padilla, but I would probably assume so.
Yeah, I mean, he probably shouldn't, but I think the EV increases because I personally think that this spot is like way over raised as a bluff. You know, it's so often still that when they get like ace 10 suited or ace jack suited, they still just rip it in, and then in the end you end up like against like 7s plus ace queen suited, maybe ace jack suited, and it's still like they raise like king deuce off and queen 7 off and like whatever. So yeah, I think it's a great spot to just rip more than you're supposed to. Man, this spot is insane. Malacca. That is such a nice spot. Also, I feel highly overbluffed by top regs. And sick that Millennial is calling this. That seems very wild to me.
I think in theory you don't have many calls or any calls at all, but I mean he dominates all his bluffs, a lot of his bluffs. I mean there's only ace deuce, maybe ace 3. I think he's also rejamming quite a bit Malacca.
Yeah,
it has like it's more of the king x and queen x offsuit. Love it.
That also feels like too wide of an open by Ramastar. It's something I also like because I think generally people play too passive against that, but I would say, I would definitely say it's too wide. Yeah, Padilla and Ramastar have both the purple tag for me, so whatever that means. Darwin chooses not to open the a6 suited, which I think is fairly reasonable, especially in Rui and F's big blind. Like I think that matters a lot. Is big blind, who's in a big blind, matters a ton.
Yeah, and he has to be really careful what hands he can raise call, and then if you're not careful, the Rui could reach him so much, and you really have to think about what hands can you actually raise call. Even ace queen is not happy if you raise, and he shoves from the big blind in that constellation.
I find it interesting with the queen deuce whether that's a reasonable lead on the flop. I would think that there are some leads on this flop. It's a spot that I have actually no really strong theoretical knowledge, but it feels like something where big ICM pressure, lots of overcards. If Malacca opens like a rather tight range, which he theoretically probably should. Yeah, I think that's a good check by Ruri on the turn as well. Like that's something that I think some weaker players like make the mistake of like just, oh, I have a queen on the turn, I bet. But I think you want to be checking this hand almost entirely. He will approach the spot rather polarized, like he has a queen, or he will start bluffing the turn a lot, I think, with his like ace jack, ace 10, king jack, king 10 suited type of stuff. So I think pretty good hand too. Definitely a hand Padilla will open. Let's see. Also interesting how much you want to be checking this flop, right? Like, against UTG open on like King Jack 8, I think it's fairly reasonable to, if you open theory range, then you can probably c-bet almost entirely, but if you open his range, you probably actually have to play a bit tighter. Like that's something that I find generally interesting, is like people study with certain ranges, but then the starting ranges are pretty tight in their particular spot, and then they play the spot, and then they actually open a wider range, but they still tend to play like the, you know, you're maybe supposed to open whatever, like a polarized, like, I don't know, 8% range or like 10% range or something with like some jamming going on in spots like this, and then suddenly like they actually open like a 16% range or like an 18% range because they just don't fold the hands that, like, I think he probably opens way too many suited aces under the gun where in theory he maybe shouldn't, and then suddenly on like King Jack 8 you actually have way more ace X than you're supposed to, and suddenly the spot is actually not as great as it might seem. So things like this I find very interesting. I don't have a particular like solution of like, oh, this is the thing you should be doing, but I think generally people are regularly too wide. Yeah, clear fold, I guess. Also a mistake you shouldn't be doing, like calling off too wide in spots like this. Pocket pairs, this is also something that I always find, like the one pip, like getting that right is so important, whether it's like pocket nines you call there or pocket tens. Like I've seen some very, very costly mistakes and have made some myself.
I think there it's more of tens or checks probably. I think against Titavin, I think he's not shoving eights versus that open.
Yeah, I think it's tens, and I think it's fairly certain tens, and then I've seen people call nines, you know, and I think that's the spot where, you know, if it's tens and you call nines, you're just making a very big mistake. And the same for him, like he probably shouldn't shove maybe sevens. Like I think it's maybe 8s plus for C-Darwin or something. Like I've seen some really absurd tight pocket folds in those spots. And then if he doesn't shove sevens and like shoves 8s plus and you call like nines, then you just make a pretty sizable mistake.
I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to support the channel and stay always up to date, then leave a subscribe here or check out our next video.